Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Philosophers. Thank you for joining us. Really excited to be back on. Just real quick, wanted to say thank you to Alex at FF Hustler 420 for filling in for me the other day. Great episode about early season strength of schedule. But I'm glad to be back, and today we're going to be talking about late season strength of schedule, specifically weeks 13 through 16. Week 13, that's that week a lot of teams are making that final push for the playoffs. And then we got 14, 15, 16. Those are your typical fantasy playoffs and championship weeks. So without further ado, let's jump in,
Let's do it.
So talking about the easier ones first, we're going to go through easier and more difficult. Looks like the 49ers might have, a pretty decent fantasy playoff schedule. So real quick, week 13, they got at home against the Buffalo Bills. Then they've got Washington football team coming across the nation to play them there in San Francisco. Then they got to go play the Cowboys, and they finish up with the Cardinals playing away at the Cardinals. So I don't like the Bills matchup, but hopefully you have secured your spot by week 13. And you're going to make the playoffs, and that Bills matchup doesn't matter a whole lot for you. Looking ahead, though, first week against the Washington football team, man, I love that matchup. Maybe not so much again for running backs. They have a pretty beastly-looking D-line on paper, but I don't expect them to have much resistance through the air. Cowboys probably will have an average defense. They've got some big names, some pass rushers, some playmakers. So, that's probably an average matchup. But finishing out against the Cardinals looks to be, of course, we're projecting before the season's even started. But, on paper right now, that looks to be a pretty solid matchup. At the very least, there should be some points scored. So, even if it's a shootout, that stuff's great for fantasy. So I like the 49ers schedule, and typically you can get their players outside of George Kittle at a pretty nice discount. So you're not spending top dollar on them, and they've got an easy schedule. Could be real nice for you. What do you think, man?
Yeah, great input. For the most part, agree with what you said. Obviously everyone should know at this point, the Buffalo Bills will have a very good defense. The 49ers do get to play them at home. Now, with the COVID situation and there being no fans, how much does that, really weigh into things? I have no idea. But I just know that if I'm used to playing in San Francisco, I would much rather play in San Francisco than in Buffalo, right? So
100%.
That's got to help some. Washington football team, I think their defensive line will actually be pretty dang good.
Yeah.
I just, I'm becoming more and more of a Haskins fan as time progresses because although he didn't seem to do very well last year, I went back and over the last two games, he had like a 112 quarterback rating. Like it just – you watch something a second time, it's like you notice things that you did. You could tell he was making those steps forward. Small steps, but steps forward. All the reports out of camp have been very positive, but, that's not either here nor there. But overall, I don't see the Washington football team as a contender of any sort for the next couple of years. The Cowboys, and I definitely root for the Cowboys. They just seem to be one of those teams where year in and year out, I feel optimistic about their defense. And then year in and year out, their defense is terrible. Maybe not terrible. That's kind of harsh, but they just
disappointing.
They're average at best. You know what I mean? So although that, they have Leighton Vander Esch coming back, he's claiming that he feels better than even before the injury, which who knows, Jalen Smith. I think a lot of it's going to come down to that secondary, you know, the fact that they lost Byron Jones. Although his stats don't look good, it's because everyone was so scared to throw in his direction. So that was a huge hit. But I definitely don't see the Cowboys defense being anything beyond a middle of the pack D. And then we got the Cardinals. They have Isaiah Simmons, which at some point I would imagine will be a force to be reckoned with, but probably not in his first season. You know, no one else on that defense necessarily scares me. I mean, Patrick Peterson could certainly shut down a wide receiver, but when we're talking about the 49ers, I mean, go for it. We'll just run the ball all day, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and
yeah, overall, I definitely like the 49ers playoff schedule. There's not a single matchup there that would worry me. I guess the biggest thing is outside of George Kittle, obviously. I mean, what other players do you feel will be on a lot of these teams that make the playoffs? You know, I was real big on Mostert. I'm off of him now. As crazy as it sounds, Jerick McKinnon looks really good. And I know you know, this is practice stuff, but shockingly, he looks pretty darn good. And the fact that he's still on the team, I'm assuming they plan on using him to some degree. We still have Tevin Coleman, who, although he never lived up to what people expected, he's still there as well. You know, are you going to start any of those guys with confidence? I wouldn't feel confident. You know, does Deebo Samuel come back and pick up right where he left off? I guess it's possible. Does he come back at all this season? It's possible he just sits out. I don't know what to think about a lot of those players outside of Kittle. So that's the only thing I did want to mention. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of echo that. I mean, I could totally see a scenario where Mostert, or really, you know, whatever back is healthy and in Shanahan's favor at that point in time, being, you know, helping people get to these playoffs, championship rounds. I could totally see that happening. I could also see Deebo coming back and you know, Shanahan scheming up lots of yards after catch for him, and with his injury discount and drafts, you know, maybe he helps some folks too if he does come back. But I can't say because he actually has the same injury as Trent Taylor did last year, and Taylor missed the whole season. So,
you know, and I know most people won't like hearing this. I think allowing Deebo Samuel to come back and play in any games in the 2020 season is a huge mistake for the organization long term. The Jones fracture is no joke, especially for receivers. When you've got a guy that's as young and as talented as him, there's no reason to risk it. There's none.
I agree.
I mean, Kittle's what, 26? They have Ayuk, who's injured as well, unfortunately, but they have a nice young core. And then Shanahan could throw JaMychal Hasty at the running back, and he'd probably be a top 15 rusher. You know, it's just one of those situations. Like, for Deebo's sake and San Fran's long-term outlook's sake, I hope that he just sits it out. You know, he'll probably come back. He probably will, but I think the smart move is have him sit out, but we'll see what happens.
For sure.
So let's hop over to our next team that we have listed in our easier playoff schedule column. Tampa Bay Bucks. Now, what's interesting here is in week 13, you know, typically at least a few teams in the league that week 13 is going to dictate whether or not you get in the playoffs or not. I mean, at least in my experience. Tampa Bay Bucks have a bye in week 13. So, if you're locked in as a playoff team, then obviously this shouldn't concern you whatsoever. If you're owning any shares of Tampa Bay Bucks, but let's say you're battling it out for that final playoff seed, and the trade deadline's week 11, let's say, and you have Chris Godwin, and you are just neck and neck with one other team, maybe even two other teams in the league. I mean, you may have to seriously consider trading Godwin, because if it comes down to that week 13 and you're without your, what I would assume to be the best receiver on your squad, I mean, if that just doesn't seem like a smart move. So that is something to keep into consideration. Hopefully he does so well throughout the season that you're just locked in and it doesn't matter. But I did want to mention that they play in week 14 the Vikings, and they're at the Falcons and at the Lions. So I'd be really excited for all three of those. I mean, the Vikings, with the signing of Yannick, and I can never pronounce his name. I don't know why. I don't even try anymore. But I do like him, especially now that he's happy. Young guy is teaming up there with Hunter. A lot of changes in that defense, but the Vikings are one of those teams that even if they lose some really good players, they just seem to always have at least a slightly above average defense. Worst case scenario, maybe it's just me, but that's that. And they actually get to play the Vikings at home in Tampa Bay versus going up to Minnesota, which I would think is huge. Falcons, I mean, that defense is just in an all-out rebuild. So bombs away, points are getting put up. The Lions,
same thing, I think. They got rid of Darius Slay. That was the only person I was afraid of.
What he does? I don't even think he plays there anymore.
That's what I'm saying. They traded him or released him. He plays for the Eagles now.
They have that young safety Walker, who he looks like he could do something. Trey Flowers, like that's the thing. It's just like no one on their defense just jumps out and it's like, oh yeah, he was really good. No, I can't think of anyone. So assuming that week 13 bye doesn't really screw you and you get in, once you're in, those Tampa Bay Buck players are going to be looking real nice. What are your thoughts about their schedule, Dustin?
Yeah, I would hope that, the way we're all kind of projecting this Tampa Bay offense, that if you've got, Evans or Godwin, maybe even one of the running backs, we'll see. There's some news about Leonard Fournette maybe signing there, so we'll see how that shakes out. But, I would hope that you took those guys high enough and we projected them to do so well that, hopefully week 13 you're not worried about it. So it's not going to scare me off of taking those guys because they definitely have the capacity, the ability to carry you to where week 13, who cares? Give me to the big dance. But
let me ask you this real quick. So let's say it does come down to one of those situations, whether you want to say you have Evans or Godwin, either or, because I think those are probably the two safest offensive, studs.
Sure.
Come to mind. You have one or the other. Trade deadline's week 11. And you and two other teams, it's pretty clear that there's like a three-way battle for whether it's the last two, if not the very last playoff spot. Are you going to roll the dice and keep them? Or are you going to try to make a trade happen with one of the teams that's already locked a locked a playoff berth. Because I mean that's a tough decision to make. You know, I mean,
it is, especially because if you're trading with someone who's already locked it up, like you don't want to give them too much to where like, yeah, you made the playoffs, but there's no way anyone's going to beat these guys or that guy or gal. You know, it probably would come down for me to trying to assess my upcoming schedule. So in those next 2 weeks, am I going against bottom tier teams, or am I going up against other playoff contenders? If I'm going against other playoff contenders, I'm going to consider trading a lot more heavily than if I'm going up against, guys who are fighting to not be the Sacco.
Or pull a fast one on one of the teams that you're actually in contention with and try to trade them to them. They may not even pick up on it. That would be slick.
That's a 3D chess move right there, dude. But yeah,
all is fair in love, war, and fantasy.
That's right up there with one of my favorite guys, Paul Charchian. He always talks about the sabotage drop. A big name who's having a slow, bad season. You drop him and hope that your competitors pick him up and suffer the same fate that you've been suffering. So yeah, man, those are all options. I think it's tough to move on from someone like Godwin or Evans, though. Real tough.
Yeah, I mean, just final thought. I think it all comes down to like you mentioned, who your upcoming opponents are. Are they teams that you feel, for the most part, confident that you should win, or are they teams that you just will admit are better than yours, or teams that where it's going to be very close and it's tough. And then on the not last but not least, like, what are these other teams, if they're even open to trading for Evans or Godwin, what are they willing to give you?
Exactly.
Because it may be like, well, hey, they may be on top of it. Well, he has a bye in week 13, so because of that, like, I'm only willing to give you this. So then obviously things change real quick if that happens. So just something to explore.
Yeah. But as far as the rest of it, man, I think you were spot on. The Vikings last year, they had serious trouble with pass coverage. I kind of expect the same thing this year. So maybe you don't want to start your running back when they play the Vikings. They've got a pretty solid defensive line. But I think quarterbacks and wide receivers should be plenty safe against the Vikings. And then, the Falcons, those should be, barn burners all season. And the Lions,
that defense is bad.
Yeah, we just talked about it a little bit. They got rid of Darius Slay. He was the only person that would have scared me away from starting someone there. So
they got Okuda. We'll see what he does.
Yeah, I think that cornerback is, and I think it's one of the tougher transitions to make from college to NFL. So, if he can come in and be that dude right off the bat, good for him. But I'm not expecting it.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on. Good stuff, man.
Yeah, man. Did you have anything else about the Bucks, or you want to move on to the Chiefs?
Nope, that's it. Let's go ahead and move on to the Chiefs.
Yeah,
Get us started.
Well, if you have Chiefs, you're probably already pretty excited. The high-flying, big-time offense. You're probably even more excited to find out that, we might consider them to have an easy playoff schedule. So let's run through it real quick. We got home against the Broncos, at the Dolphins, at the Saints, and then home against the Falcons.
That is nice.
The Broncos, could have some nice pass rushers, Chubb and Miller, but Andy Reid, one of the kings of schemes in the NFL, he's going to find a way to protect his $500 million man back there. That might actually be the toughest matchup they've got, and I don't think it's a tough one. I think we're talking about another. They've got Justin Simmons and Chris Harris still there, but I kind of expect them to be a middle of the road defense again. They're going to have some
Actually,
stout games at home. Is Chris Harris not there
Chris
anymore?
Harris is not. And the only reason I
Okay.
know that is because I watch Hard Knocks. He is
Ah,
with the Chargers.
okay. My bad. So
No, you're good, bro. It just like came to mind, and I was like, since I actually know this, I'm gonna just
yeah,
chime in. A little stat
definitely.
correction there. No worries.
So that even makes playing against them even more favorable in my mind. No Chris Harris. Um, so that's their toughest one. The Dolphins. We saw what they did last year. They're in a complete rebuild. And they've got some okay pieces, but I don't expect them to be a dominant team on either side of the ball. The Saints are a weird one for me. I think they are going to be basically the same defense that we're used to, but that doesn't mean that they don't get in shootouts with high-scoring offenses. We see it all the time with them, especially in that dome. I'm expecting that to be like a 58-54 type of game. Great for fantasy. We already talked about the Falcons. I don't think we need to talk about them anymore. Start all your players against the Falcons always. So what a fantastic, lottery you've hit if you've managed to snag a couple Chiefs, and then you have this type of matchup. If the projections hold true, you're looking at some. I mean, you could have some big games from some of those guys in the weeks that matter most. What about you, man? Are you as excited about that as I am?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely excited. Definitely excited. Let's start with the Broncos. So Bradley Chubb is back this season.
Yep.
Now, will he be the same Bradley Chubb that we saw his rookie year? We'll find out. I mean, it's possible, but then again, it could take him a solid half season, if not the entire season, to really get back to where he was. We just don't know. I think that Chubb's presence on the field does help Von Miller quite a bit. So I do expect Von to have a bounce back season. Simmons as a safety, I do like him. I'm a fan. But at the end of the day, I think what it comes down to is are we going to see Drew Lock be this year's Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson? And you know what I mean? Because he has the weapons to put up the type of points that the Chiefs are going to put up. Now, will he be able to do it? I don't know. The odds are against him. I think it's safe to say that, but it's possible. I think that's really the key here, because when I think about the Chiefs defense and I think about the Broncos defense, I more or less pretty evenly matched in my opinion. Take it or leave it, but that's just how I feel thinking about it right now. But I know that Patrick Mahomes is going to have no problem connecting with his receivers, not to mention use his new toy and Clyde the Glide Hilaire. If Drew Lock in that offense can go, keep up with Mahomes and the Chiefs as they're putting points up on the board, then, there's the off chance that the Broncos just pull up a major upset, but that's the only way it's possible. The only way. At the Dolphins, I will say, I'm not going to say I'm a fan of the Dolphins, but I catch myself rooting for them. I think I'm just a Brian Flores guy. I just like his style.
They have
Preston Williams.
They have like Calvin Oy. If you play IDP, I'm a big Jerome Baker guy. Shaq Thompson. So they've got some pieces on defense. I don't see anything about it that says they're going to be dominant. I'm sure they'll have some good games.
Yeah. Well, and then so thinking about the Dolphins, I was going to just talk real quick about the offense, because if Preston Williams returns to full form and the Devontae Parker breakout was no fluke, and we have at least above average quarterback play, I could see them putting up points. I know that sounds crazy just to think about the Dolphins keeping up with the Chiefs, but I'm just saying, man, Devontae Parker put on last year. Preston Williams looked real good until he suffered the injury. Reports have been real positive about how he looks. I still think it's going to take him some time, but you just never know with those things. All the Mike Gesicki hype. So I don't know. Can the offense put up points is question one for me. But beyond that, they did acquire Byron Jones. Great signing. You look at his stats for the season last year, and you would think he just isn't a good player at all. But no, in fact, he's an elite cornerback that teams normally just avoid throwing his direction. So that's a plus. But then we think about the Chiefs, and it's like, okay, are you going to have Byron Jones shut down Sammy Watkins for the game? Okay,
that's fine.
Doesn't do anything anyway. Nothing scares me about that. The Broncos would have a much better chance of being able to keep up with, the points on the board than the Dolphins. But again, it's just one of those, that's the only way possible. At the Saints, man, that's going to be a fun one to watch. I think, because I remember a couple years where the Saints defense was considered terrible. It was one of those if a team's playing the Saints, you stream those guys. And then by the second half of the season, they were one of the better defenses. And it seems like they've kind of stayed on that up and up ever since. The offense is just so different. You know what I mean? Because the Chiefs are so explosive, and they actually have a Kamara-like running back to match the Saints. When I think of the Saints, I think more of not necessarily just game management, but time of possession, picking up lots of first downs, getting into the red zone, and then finding a way to punch it in for the touchdown. And sure, we'll see the Chiefs do that as well, but we're going to see many, many more of these huge touchdown passes or long runs from the Chiefs. So, I guess it just really comes down to how those counteract against each other. Man, that's going to be a game to watch. I think that would be the only one that and let's be honest. I mean, any of those key skill players for the Chiefs, they're matchup proof. You're starting them, but that would be the only one where I would be a little nervous, just a little bit.
Yeah.
But you get past that and you play the Falcons, and if you have let's say you got Pat Mahomes and Travis Kelce, you're probably going to win the championship going up against the Falcons. Let's be real here. So yeah, Chiefs with their playoff schedule. I mean, as long as you make it there, things are looking really, really good. Any final thoughts before we shift to our next team?
No, we just defer a little bit on how that Saints game might go. I fully expect it to be reminiscent of that Rams Chiefs game a few years ago. Final score was 68-62 or whatever it was. That's what I'm expecting from that game. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Well, and then the whole, just having to remind ourselves that there will be no fans there. Man, that changes a lot. The Saints would have had at least a little bit of an edge had there been just a sold out dome,
yeah.
But that would be the only one where I feel like You know, because who do the Saints have? They have Lattimore.
Lattimore, Von Bell,
I
Marcus
think Von Bell's
Davenport,
on actually.
Demario Davis. They got some names.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to say it, and I'll just leave it at this. I'm not scared of the Saints defense. I just feel like that might be a game where the Saints find a way to keep the ball out of Mahomes' hands and um, keep the Chiefs' offense on the sidelines. And, I will say, if they're able to do that, I mean, it's going to be hard to get in that rhythm, because for a lot of players, it's real important to like get in that flow of the game early, get the rhythm going. But if somehow, some way, the Saints are able to like maybe stop them, get the punt, and just methodically move the chains slowly but surely and get down there and eat up a whole bunch of clock and then punch it in. And then here we are. Saints are up 7-0 and we're already a few minutes deep into the second quarter. That's a situation that I don't know if Mahomes and the Chiefs have necessarily faced up to this point. I may be going a little too far into this one, I'll be honest, but I just, you know, I'm assuming Drew Brees is done after this year. So maybe I'm just like wishful thinking that even though I love Mahomes, I just really want Brees to get one more. But from a fantasy aspect, yeah, let's keep it real. You're perfectly fine playing any Chiefs players in any of these matchups without a doubt. So sorry for the rant, but just real excited for some football. But we're going to move on to our next team that we have in our easier strength of schedule group, and that's going to be the Green Bay Packers. Week 13, they're at home against the Eagles. Week 14, at the Lions. Week 15, home against the Panthers. And then week 16, at home, Titans. None of those defenses scare me at all. And I'd say the Eagles and Titans are probably the better of the bunch, and they get to play them at home in Green Bay. So, how many players will actually be fantasy relevant for Green Bay this year? I have no clue. No clue at all. But as far as real life football, it looks good. I mean, obviously Devontae Adams, he's a lot. I think that's obvious. But Aaron Rodgers, I don't know what to think. I want to feel like he's going to come back with a vengeance and just go crazy. But he just doesn't seem to be the same Aaron Rodgers as far as buying time in the pocket, letting his receivers get open deep down the field, and then just on the run, throwing a bomb on the money. I haven't seen that. It's a great schedule, but outside of Devontae Adams, is there anyone else that you're confident in, not only to play in the fantasy playoffs, but just to play in fantasy in general on the Packers?
Well, I think if you took Aaron Jones, you gotta plug him in with confidence until we see that you can't.
Yeah, I'm just too scared to take him personally. I don't blame people for doing it. I'm too scared.
Matt LaFleur scares me because we saw him waste Derrick Henry. So for that reason, I kind of faded Jones. And the way he's talking, he wants to use a 3-headed backfield or, whatever. Do your thing, Matt LaFleur. You're the coach, not me, but it didn't make sense to me. As far as the Green Bay schedule, we've talked about the Eagles, maybe not having the scariest defense. However, they do have Darius Slay. So if Devontae Adams gets matched up against Darius Slay, that does give me a little bit of pause. But I think the Eagles have come out and said that they don't plan on having Slay shadow number one receivers. So if Slay's not going to shadow Adams, I'm fine starting him. If he is going to shadow him, I mean, you got to start him. It's Devontae Adams.
To say, like, you're starting him no matter what.
But I don't like it. Slay's a good cornerback. So, but I mean, really, that's the Lions. We talked about that. Probably going to start my players against them. I'm not scared of their defense. The Panthers either. They got rid of Luke Kuechly.
Falcons for me, basically.
Yeah, their defense is definitely in a rebuild. The Titans in the championship. I mean, you made it to the championship. You start your studs. You dance with who brung you. I don't like that matchup. It's not the greatest matchup. Titans have pretty solid defense. They like to control the clock, like you were just talking about with the Saints.
That might be a real low-scoring game, actually, the more I think about it.
Yeah, another thing that gives me pause a little bit about some of these matchups is we're talking about December games outdoors in Lambeau everywhere except for the Lions. And, we've seen how that goes. If we're talking about snowballs.
I didn't even cross my mind, to be honest with you, man. I didn't even think about that. I'm going to have to double check this, but I heard an interesting stat recently, and it was – I almost don't want to say it because it was almost unbelievable, but it came from a very credible source. So we'll have to double check this. But supposedly Green Bay as a team was number 8 overall in passing or pass attempts, something along those lines. And I was like, no way. I'm trying to think of who it was that said that. It was a real credible source. I might try to find that before we end the episode, but again, don't quote me on that. It came from a reliable source and I just thought of it. So I'm going to throw it out there, but that surprised me. I think if anyone has a chance of exceeding Michael Thomas's production this year, it is Devontae Adams. As you mentioned though, and I'm disappointed I didn't even think about it. These games are going to be played during the winter season at Lambeau. What are the conditions like? Is this one of those games where it's just really fucking stupid to even try throwing the ball? I don't know. If that's the case, then, well, Devontae Adams is going to really disappoint a lot of people. But nevertheless, overall, really good schedule for sure.
Yeah, really. The only thing that gives me any pause is the outdoors and the Titans matchup, especially for the running backs. Like the Titans matchup is probably gonna be bad for anyone on the ground, especially if it's one of those nasty weather games. So.
Well, at least you got those ones that you feel better about to get you there. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, can't be mad at that.
No, not at all. Another team in the North, though, that we've got down for a pretty nice looking schedule, and this might be my favorite one, the Ravens. So we're all expecting, a high scoring offense similar to last year. And if you got that, you probably, if you got that from some of your Ravens, you probably had a pretty easy time getting to this point. But weeks 13, home against the Cowboys. 14, we go away, divisional rivals, to Cleveland and play the Browns. Coming back home, got the Jaguars, and then wrapping up the fantasy season at home against the Giants. So these are all real prime matchups. I don't think any of these teams have an above average defense. We've talked about the Cowboys. I won't go into them too much more. But again, don't see them as a dominant defense. The Browns, they got some nice players.
Man, they lost that rookie safety though.
Yeah, they lost Grant Delpit.
That's a shame.
So, I think maybe their defensive line might be the strongest part of their defense, but outside of that, not too terrified of any particular Browns player. The Jags have completely dismantled their championship defense. That thing's going to be like tissue paper this year, I think.
Yeah,
and
you're basically you might be playing a college level defense when we refer to the Jaguars. Maybe who is there? Who is honestly there? Is that where Joe Schobert went?
Yep, Joe Schobert went there.
Beyond him, who else is on that defense?
Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on a name.
And this is a defense that a few years ago was far and wide the best defense in the league, and made Blake Bortles look like a good quarterback. It's just so crazy how times have changed so quickly.
Yeah. I'm not scared of the Giants defense either, though. They lost their rookie safety, at least for part of the season, McKinney.
I hadn't even heard that yet.
Yeah, he's out with
Elpid and McKinney, man. I liked both of them.
Yeah, he's got a leg injury as well. I'm blanking on what it was, but he's out for at least some time. And then, they got Blake Martinez, but that's similar to the Joe Schobert thing. Like, outside of that, do they really have anything that's going to be considered a formidable or stout defense? I don't think so. I think they're going to have to score some points to keep up in some of these games. And, man, this looks great for the Ravens. So if you went Ravens and Chiefs heavy, you're probably set up pretty nicely.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, and just thinking about super flex leagues and realizing the playoff schedules that both Mahomes and Lamar Jackson have, it's like if they weren't already a 1-2 smash, there you go. Yeah, I'm gonna run through it real quick. Cowboys, they got some talent on the D. They just never live up to the hype. Period in the story. Browns, no one there worries me at all. I mean, Lamar Jackson may not play after the first quarter in that game. That's the only noteworthy thing I could say about that is they could possibly yank Lamar out early just because they're already winning 40-something to 0. The Giants, again, Blake Martinez, I know he's produced with the Packers in the past. I just think that was more of a system thing personally. We'll find out. I could be wrong.
They did just sign Logan Ryan.
That was a good signing. I've been sitting here waiting, and I actually grabbed him in a few IDP leagues once I heard that because, yeah, that was a good signing. But he's an older guy. Not to say that he's not still good, but joining a team this late, as far as team cohesion and just, understanding what's going on, at least for the first few games, will probably be quite difficult. But gosh, man, not only the Chiefs, but the Ravens as well, both having just such favorable fantasy playoff matchups. If you haven't had your draft yet and you were thinking about doing something other than go with the good offenses, well, hopefully this confirms go with those good offenses because they got great schedules also.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts on that before we shift over to the teams with the tougher schedules?
No, I think basically these shouldn't adjust your ranks too much, but it's a nice thing to use as like a tiebreaker. We're projecting week 16.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're projecting week 16 right now, and we're still a week from the first game kicking off. So things can change in an instant in the NFL season, and just want to reiterate that by no means because the Ravens have an easy schedule on paper will it play out that way, and you should draft all Ravens all the time. I think these are more used as like a tiebreaker, or maybe, you're having a hard time ranking a couple players and, oh, well, this guy's a Raven. He's got a better playoff schedule, so we'll bump him up. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and just to echo that real quick, personally, I like to focus on the first 3 to 4 games on the schedule personally, because when I first started fantasy, at least when I knew what I was doing, because I'll admit when I started, I was really young. So it took me probably a good year or two to really, really get a firm grasp on how to actually compete. But I noticed a lot of people would always talk about their playoff schedule, and it's like the season hasn't even started. And so I started focusing on those first 3, 4, 5 games because, if you jump out and just stack up a bunch of wins early on, it's much easier to deal with those things that get thrown at you mid-season, like one of your best players gets hurt, or or you just have a 3 straight weeks where had you played any other team but the team you played, you'd have won, assuming you're going head-to-head format. But I like to focus on early schedule. What I do use playoff schedule for that's for those mid-season trades, for me at least. If someone, first 4 games just balling out of control, and then I look and realize that, I'm very likely going to make the playoffs at this point, but this person, although he's done well, they have just a very scary playoff schedule. I may go ahead and try to trade them then and there. It all depends on the situation, but that's just kind of how I use it. But yeah, you could certainly take it into consideration during the draft. I just weigh the first 4 games a little more heavily as a tiebreaker personally, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Without further ado, let's talk about the teams that we feel have a much tougher playoff schedules. And I'll get us started. And the first team is the Buffalo Bills. So week 13 at the 49ers, 14 Steelers, 15 at the Broncos, 16 at the Patriots. Disclaimer, I completely forgot about all of these defensive players opting out for the Patriots. So my mistake. I just wanted to throw that out there. So that doesn't seem like as bad of a matchup, but it's still at Foxborough. So that's that. But at San Fran, San Fran's going to have a good defense. Steelers, geez, when do they not have a good defense? At the Broncos, again, I'm pretty optimistic about the Broncos, especially with Chubb being on the field. If he's back to what he was as a rookie, game changer. But just the fact that he's on the field, I think, is going to help Von Miller tremendously. And again, I just don't know how much to weigh home versus away games. I really don't, but like Buffalo Bills, they're going to be used to playing in colder weather. In week 13, they have to go up against one of the best defenses in the league at San Francisco, one of the sunniest places in the country. So I don't know how much that affects them per se. I really don't. I haven't experienced just that drastic of a climate change. I like the Bills as a team, but thinking about like relevant fantasy players, so let's think about Josh Allen. I'm not feeling good about him against most of those. Actually, we'll take the Patriots off because obviously you got to win the other games to get to that ship. 49ers still at 49ers, home against Steelers, at the Broncos. I'm feeling nervous as hell to start Josh Allen. Same with Stephon Diggs. I'm feeling nervous. The running back, I don't even know what to think. I don't know who's going to get the bulk or if it's just a flat out 50-50. Yeah, I mean, does it John Brown? I mean, are you going to start John Brown here? I'm not.
No, I don't.
Scary.
So, I mean, the 49ers, we know what their defense is. It's going to be good again. They didn't lose many pieces. And as far as going from somewhere that's cold, where you're used to it being cold, and playing warm, I've done that playing rugby. Here in Central Texas in February, it's cold, it's rainy, it's windy. And again, Texas, so for us, cold is like 40, 50 degrees. But got to drive 5 hours to McAllen, and it's 96 degrees there in February, and it is miserable going from that. Obviously these guys are in a lot better shape than I ever was, but my own anecdotal experience, it's pretty awful. Not to mention, how many miles is that? 3,000.
That's essentially cross country. Eastern to Pacific time, so that certainly plays some sort of role. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The Steelers always seem to have, even if it's not one of those good on paper, it's kind of like a bend but don't break type of defense. It seems Tomlin always throws something together.
Is just the man. He is the man. When it's all said and done, he may be one of, if not my favorite NFL football coach of all time. Because I remember last year, like he should have won Coach of the Year in my opinion.
With what they did with their quarterbacks, yeah, he should have been up there.
Being out that quick, and they were still somehow, some way contending. And the games they lost by like a very small mark. I mean, he's a hell of a coach, man, and especially being as young as he is.
Players seem to like him too.
Yeah, I mean, I love the guy. Steelers. I just think of no matter what names you see on the depth chart at the defense, you better believe that defense is going to be playing for sure.
Yeah, they draft and they develop well. So I don't like that matchup either. And then, the Broncos, we talked about not being super scared of them, and it's true, I'm not. But again, outdoors at Mile High Stadium, sure, there might not be any fans there, but in December, at a mile elevation, it's going to be cold. It's probably going to be windy. If there's a snowstorm, look out. And then you got to turn around and go right back across the country. So this is interesting too, because they're going, back and forth across the country in these weeks, right? So they're going at 49ers, back home to play the Steelers, back across into the mountains of Colorado to play the Broncos. Then they're coming back home to play the Patriots. You're talking about Tomlin being the man with defense. I feel the same way about Belichick. He'll put Troy Brown back there and have an elite defense. So they lost a lot of names to opt-outs and free agency and whatnot, but I fully expect them to by this point in time, to cobble something together that's pretty decent. And on top of that, we're talking about playing outdoors in Foxborough in December. So again, what is this weather going to be like? I don't like any of these really. So yeah, these are definitely guys who, as we approach the midway point in the season, if I think I'm going to make the playoffs, I'm probably going to shop my Bills. This is not a favorable playoff schedule in my opinion. So that's all I got on that. You got anything else to add?
I think that about sums it up. Let's go ahead and dive into the next team. So the next team that we have here for one of the tougher playoff schedules in fantasy, it's going to be the Denver Broncos. Week 13, they're at the Chiefs. Week 14 at Panthers. Week 15 at home against the Bills. Week 16 at the Chargers. Week 14 at the Panthers, hey, that's great. That's great. But, seeing the Chiefs, I know we mentioned them earlier when we talked about the Chiefs schedule. if that game gets out of hand, you know, people like, I don't know. I just don't know what to think. Can the offense keep up? And if they can't, what are they going to do? Are they just going to chunk it up to Cortland Sutton every single play and just completely phase out Melvin Gordon and Fant and even Judy? I don't know. But anytime you go to Arrowhead to play the best overall offense in the league, um, that puts a lot of pressure on you offensively. So I'd be real nervous to start any of those offensive players. I mentioned Panthers, no issue there, but the Bills, man, the Bills got a rock solid D. Fortunately, the Broncos do get them at home, which helps, which we mentioned previously. So, you know, I don't want to necessarily say things that have already been said. So, at the Chargers, man, such sad news about Derwin James. My heart goes out to the guy. I love him as a player. You know, I remember watching him his rookie year and thinking, man, this guy might end up being the best safety to ever play the game. And then had that first significant injury and has now had his second significant injury. And it's just so sad how much that impacts them overall as far as their defense is concerned. I mean, it certainly impacts them, but they have so many other stud players that I still view them, especially when you have to go at the Chargers. I still view them as a tough defense. You know, I really like the linebacker that they drafted. Bosa's obviously still there. Even old Melvin Ingram, you know, he's kind of like the guy that does that dirty work, may not always show up on the stat sheet, but he just seems to help that team in just really interesting ways. I just really like the guy and his grind. But yeah, you know, if you make the playoffs and you got guys such as Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Melvin Gordon, Noah Fant, shoot, even Drew Lock, I mean, you may just have to roll with them. You may just have to. It certainly is possible that that week 13 is just a shootout and you get a ton of points from all of them. And if that happens, that's great because you should be perfectly fine in week 14. But then when we talk about week 15 and week 16, yeah, I'm going to start them, but I'm not going to feel very confident about it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, we've talked about the Chiefs, and we've already talked about them playing the Broncos ad nauseum. So I'm not going to go too much into that, other than, you know, it's another outdoor game and at Arrowhead in December. But just like you, man, the Panthers are the only matchup here that I'm like really comfortable starting them, starting my Broncos. You're right. We could have a boom game against the Chiefs. It just kind of depends on how that plays out. You know, the Chargers, though, I expect them, even without Derwin James, to have a pretty solid defense. One person you didn't mention is my boy Drew Tranquil. Don't sleep on him. If you're in an IDP league, check the waivers for him. He's going to be a 3-down linebacker for him this year, and he produced some excellent numbers rotating in last year. So he earned his spot, and he looks to be a find for them, a diamond in the rough, if you will. So I like the Chargers defense. They even have a good returner. I forget his first name. He's that DB King. I want to say Marcus. That's not right, though. Desmond, maybe. I don't know.
I know what you're talking about, though.
Yeah. So, you know, the Chargers definitely have a tendency to fall apart. And, you know, maybe that happens in week 16. But on paper, their defense does not look like a great matchup for the Broncos' young offense. That's my thoughts on it.
I agree.
You probably got to start Sutton, like you said, just because of the draft capital. But if you have someone you picked up on the waivers that's been outperforming him and been your wide receiver one, then you got to make that call. But I think you're probably right. If you've rolled with Sutton all season, you probably have to throw him in there for those matchups, and it is what it is.
At least week 13 and week 14.
Yeah.
Now,
15.
You've had to face Tre'Davious White. That would be a time where I'm sorry. I don't care how good you did all year. Assuming I have a player that's just remotely close to Sutton, I'm benching him.
Yeah.
I think Tre'Davious White is low-key the best cornerback in the league.
And I don't think Sutton is the type of receiver that we see beat him.
I don't think any receiver is someone that we see beat him. Like
Devontae
Parker did work on him last year. So shout out to Devontae Parker once again. But other than that one person last season, no one did anything against him.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah, so, it's a negative matchup for sure.
Right on.
Sure.
Right on. Go ahead and get us into our next team.
Yeah, this next one is just absolutely brutal in my opinion, and I want nothing to do with this schedule at all. But let's talk about the Jacksonville dumpster fire Jaguars.
And they got some fantasy relevant players.
They do. I'm a huge fan of DJ Shark. Huge fan of Shark.
We had to talk about him. Just throwing that out there because I know we're probably getting a lot of like, oh my God, why are we waiting? There's a couple of players, so bear with us here.
Huge fan of DJ Shark, and the way he's been getting hyped up, like he's going anywhere from like the 4th through the 7th round. So if you're taking a guy in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, I would expect him to be productive for me should I make it to the playoffs. I expect him to be behind a lot and throw the ball, 600 times this season. Even more than that, I'm sure. But week 13, they're at Minnesota. Week 14, back home in Jacksonville to play the division rival Titans. 15, going back north to play at the Ravens, and then coming home back to Jacksonville to play the Bears. I do not like any of these matchups.
I may not like a single matchup for their entire season,
but these are brutal.
Yeah, these are
brutal. We were talking about potentially trading someone with because their bye was week 13. If I've got DJ Shark and he hits the way we think he is, I'm looking to trade him before the deadline.
Smart.
Because this is brutal.
And you read my mind, man. Great minds think alike, because I was just thinking the same thing. Like, this is probably one of those situations, maybe not in Dynasty, but
not in Dynasty.
In a redraft, as good as he may end up doing, and he certainly should do very well. When you're used to playing in Jacksonville and you got to go to Minnesota, regardless of how that secondary ends up looking, let's just be honest. It's going to be a tough matchup. The Titans should be solid. At the Ravens, I think the Ravens are going to have just an elite defense this year personally. But then again, they usually do. So
yeah.
And then the Bears – I'm really hoping that Khalil Mack bounces back. I've read and actually even watched some videos about him working out this offseason, and apparently something happened where I don't know if someone said something to him directly, or maybe it was, I don't know. He could have been watching SportsCenter for all I know, but something happened and it just seemed to really motivate him. And more or less, he's taken the stance that he's going to reclaim the title as the best defensive player in the league this year. So props to him for putting in the work. He's shown it in the past. Will he do it? To be determined, but just wanted to mention that. But yeah, I agree. Shark, even Minshew, because I do think Minshew will have a good year this year. Both those guys, if come mid-season, if they produce the way that we're thinking they will, you should definitely, open up some communication lines with some other players and see if you can make some trades for similar players, but with better playoff schedules for sure. God, the Jaguars they're just going to be tough to watch.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be a surprise if you see that they won a game, I think, any given week.
Yep. But, that's why they play the game. You never know. What I'm really curious on is the last thing, then we'll move on. Let's say they get the number 1 overall pick in the upcoming NFL draft, which I can't imagine would be anyone other than Trevor Lawrence. But let's also say that Minshew not only matches, but maybe takes another step forward compared to what he did last season. As the organization of the Jacksonville Jaguars, do you at least consider trading down from that number 1 pick? Because, I mean, you would get the Hall of Halls for Trevor Lawrence, I would imagine. That's something that you would even think about.
Definitely would
I
think
honestly
about
would.
it.
I would, because assuming he plays well.
Yeah.
Because assuming you get the haul that I think you would get, you could walk away, with one of the top wide receivers, one of the top running backs, maybe have an extra first round for the next couple of years as well. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there because I kind of think that with Minshew and Shark, they're going to find a way to win a game or two. And there's some other teams that are going to be down there with them. So I don't know if it's a lot that they get that number 1 spot, but that's just it's just a fun scenario to think about. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's definitely something that I would consider if I was a GM because, multiple first round picks in multiple years is going to set your franchise up for a lot of success unless you just absolutely suck at drafting. Um, but, there's people out there who've said Trevor Lawrence is the best prospect since like Andrew Luck, the best quarterback prospect since maybe Peyton Manning. So maybe if that's what you believe, I don't even think you can give it away for multiple first round picks in the next couple of years because, I mean, you see how those guys completely transform franchises. Knowing Jacksonville, they'll find a way to be Jacksonville and completely screw up whatever the right choice is. That I'm fully confident in. But, man, that's a rock and a hard place talking about picking Trevor Lawrence or trading for big time multiple picks, assets.
I mean, I guess if you don't go that route, you would more or less almost have to trade Minshew then at that point, right?
If you pick Trevor Lawrence, absolutely.
Yeah, if they ended up with the number 1 overall, I mean, or if they know, pre-trade deadline that more or less they're locked in for that number 1 pick, do you go ahead and just find someone and trade? I mean, you're not going to get, even anything, even not even get a slice of the pie of the haul that you would get for Trevor Lawrence from Minshew, but get something while you can, right?
Yeah, you definitely would have to try at least attempt to trade Minshew. If you can't find a trade partner, then what was he, a 6th round pick? Was he undrafted? I don't remember, but it can't be too consequential to cut him.
But if the man's playing, he played well last season. He played well, and considering how well he played, like, do you think he ever dreamed that he would touch the field other than the practice field last year? Probably not.
No,
So the
yeah.
fact that he just got threw in and did very, very well, in fact, like had he actually gotten into the end zone on all those rushes and rushing yards that he had, he would have finished much higher fantasy wise, and people would probably be talking much more about him. Um, Man, it's an interesting scenario, man, because if if their defense is just that bad, but Minshew is out here looking like, a top 10 quarterback in the league, and you still end up with that number one pick, I would honestly think I would really consider about trading it, because I mean, you could I can't imagine what type of offers you would get, but I'd imagine that you could get a couple of future firsts. You could probably get that team's first just later, and then maybe a player of need or a player that's in a position of need. Because I mean, you could make a pretty quick turnaround as far as rebuilding is concerned doing that versus taking Trevor Lawrence, but you still don't have shit on defense. Your running backs are these two guys that no one really knows much about other than they're on the team. Westbrook, up to this point, bust. Conley hasn't done anything. They do have Tyler Eifert, the one-year wonder, but I just
Shark and Chenault.
if you're in that situation, man, and if Minshew looks like a top 10 quarterback in the league for years to come, I don't know why you wouldn't at least consider it. Now, actually considering it and pulling the trigger on it are very different. I understand that. It would be hard. It's just something that's been on my mind because I could totally see Minshew just having a great season and the Jaguars still not winning a single game. So,
yeah, it's going to be a rough season for him for sure.
That it is. Well, let's go ahead and get into our last team that has a tougher fantasy playoff schedule, and that's going to be the New England Patriots. So week 13, home against the Chargers. Excuse me. Week 13 is at the Chargers. Week 14 is at the Rams. Week 15 at the Dolphins. Week 16, Bills. I don't even know what to expect from the Patriots team, especially with so many of their defensive players opting out. Cam Newton is looking good at practice, at least. They did cut Mohamed Sanu, which I think is hilarious. But yeah, that regardless, that's a tough schedule. The only game that they have that home field Foxborough advantage is against the Bills, who are used to playing there anyway.
And have one of the better Ds.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough sledding. We'll have to really see how the Chargers and Rams defenses actually pan out. I think the Chargers, at least, for sure will be among the better defenses. The Rams, I could see it because they have Aaron Donald.
Jalen
They
Ramsey.
do have Jalen Ramsey. Just not an ideal playoff schedule for a team that has a new quarterback that no one really knows what to expect. The running back situation is a mess, for lack of a better term. I mean, but then again, it's been a mess over there in the running back depth chart for a while. But, does N'Keal Harry live up to his draft pedigree? Because, I mean, he did essentially nothing last year. Julian Edelman, I'm sure will be productive, but was that more of the connection he had with Brady? And who's their starting tight end? Is it that rookie Asia? I don't even know.
Don't either.
But then again, we're talking about Bill Belichick here, so that quick reminder to myself, like he certainly could pull it off. I really don't like any of those, to be honest. Even the Dolphins, I just don't think the Patriots. It's going to be really hard for the Patriots overall, because I feel that in that type of system where just historically from everyone you hear over and over how hard it is to learn and just pick up the system. I mean, Cam Newton's there, Sonny Michel and just came off the pup, but how healthy is he really? Damian Harris, there's lots of hype around him, but I think did he even carry the ball last year? If he did, it was less than a handful of times. Lamar Miller, he got signed, but he's been there, a week and a half?
He just got off the pup list.
Yeah, I don't like it at all. I don't like it one bit. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the big bonus of this schedule is most of the games you don't have to play outdoors in Foxborough. But outside of that,
but that might be in their favor. Well, at least some of the players. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is like we don't have to worry about the weather. It's we're going to sunny LA, and I wouldn't even be surprised if they just stayed in LA over the week, because I mean, all that travel, dude.
You gotta win. Yeah. I hear you.
Because you're in LA back-to-back weeks a while. It just doesn't make sense to me to come back. So like, stay rested. I don't know about that Rams defense either. I think it's going to be good, but I could also see it being very disappointing. We've talked about the Chargers. They could have a classic Chargers game where they, just don't show up. But on paper, they've got a good pass rush, some good linebackers. If anything, maybe the secondary is a little bit of the weakness. But as you just mentioned, it's not like New England has world beater wide receiver core stacked up, against them. So
and Byron Jones, he's going to take one of those receivers out of the game completely, assuming he didn't get space jammed over the offseason and lose all of his talent. Because, I mean, what I saw last season, that dude was just shutting down people left and right, no problem.
Yeah, and
I would probably have him right behind Tre'Davious White personally. But that's just because I've watched a lot of his games. So, yeah, I mean, you could certainly make an argument that this isn't necessarily the toughest.
But it's not the easiest, that's for sure.
It's not the easiest, and, I just really am curious if the Derwin James injury is going to really make that Chargers D take a step back. The Rams, I don't think they're going to be considered a great defense. I think they'll be like a middle of the pack. But the fact that the Patriots have to play in the Rams stadium or dome, I don't even know. I think they have a brand new stadium, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I just don't like it. I don't like it because the only players that I'm really thinking will be fantasy relevant are Cam Newton, Julian Edelman, and N'Keal Harry. I personally think he will. And looking at this schedule, the Chargers will absolutely shut down the Patriots' run game, and they can just key in on the pass, in my opinion. So that's going to be tough. Don't know what to think about the Rams. That's the question mark. Byron Jones will take N'Keal Harry completely out of the game.
And the Bills,
and the Bills, same thing. Tre'Davious White. So I don't like it. You know, with the new quarterback who has just no experience with any of his teammates outside of these last few weeks of non-contact practice. I just don't like it. Not the worst out of the teams that we've talked about, but just not a fan.
Yeah, I'm not super excited about it either. So, always a fluid situation in the NFL. Injuries, just, the way the season unfolds can always change these things. So,
yeah, I literally wake up every morning terrified to check my phone because it's like every day there's a relevant injury, when it comes to fantasy football. And every day I'm like, man, who is it going to be today? And how many shares of them do I have? I've been nervous. It's just been one after another. But on the bright side, we will be having a football season, ladies and gentlemen. Kickoffs right around the corner. Can't wait. That's everything that we had for y'all today. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, much love to everyone who's viewed, subscribed, commented, liked, shared. Much love, truly and deeply. That's why we're here. Like I've said in most of our recent episodes, if anyone out there would like to leave a comment and let us know specifically what they want to see us do in an upcoming video, that would be amazing, because that's why we're here. We want to give you what you want. Do that, and we'll actually reach out to you directly. And not to say it's mandatory, but if you would like, you can certainly join us for that episode and contribute in the episode of your choosing. So hit us up in the comments and we'll get in contact. Until then, stay tuned. Any final comments, or if not, close this on out, Dustin?
Yeah. Like, comment, subscribe. Follow us on Twitter. Just out here trying to bring thought-provoking content that maybe you hadn't thought about before. Let us know what you want to do or what you want to hear. We'll do it. You're more than welcome to come on with us. But other than that, man, just having a blast doing this, and really appreciate anyone who's shown any support. So, till next time.
Agreed. Well, much love, everyone. Stay tuned. We'll be right back at you.
Later.